Welcome back to Better Than Before. I'm Tony Richards. Here in this part of the show, I thought I'd give you 5 common behavioral blind spots that I see or have seen in executives or in executive teams. Here's number 1, avoiding tough decisions. When a tough decision comes up, the executive wants to avoid it or shove it off or delay or procrastinate in making the tough call. So there are only, 3 or 4 things you can do with this as a coach. Here's what I try to do when I'm with an executive that's having trouble making a tough decision or continues to delay action. So the number 1 thing I try to do with them when I'm coaching them is I try to tell them, get as much information as you can. That way you're going to feel good and have some confidence about your final decision. And the most difficult decisions always have to do with people, when people are involved. And there's all kinds of reasons for that, depending on the relationship that you have with the person and so on and so forth. But you're going to have to make the decision, and do not get trapped into thinking you don't have enough information and thinking that if you just wait a little while longer, you'll get more info. Or maybe if you wait a little longer that this situation will just dissipate or go away or get better on its own. And you're never going to know everything you could possibly know before you make the decision. So you have to be comfortable in that, I know what I need to know, and I just need to get on with deciding what to do here. And once you've made the decision, you need to communicate that if it's appropriate. Communicate your decision with your team as necessary. Some people decisions, you probably don't need to communicate all of it. Because you may be violating some employment law when you do that or something, but at least as much as you can, try to help everybody understand. And chances are, most of the time, the team already suspects and knows that something should have been done quite a while ago. And most of the time, they're trying to figure out why you haven't taken action. So that's not as big a deal as you possibly think it is. And finally, once you've made the decision, move on, get past it, get on the road to moving forward, get on with being productive, and put it all behind you. I mean, that's really, really important. I mean, leaders don't always waste a lot of time on the front end. Sometimes they waste a lot of time on the back end after it's over. And when it's over, it's over. Move on. Managers typically don't deal with tough decisions the right way, and employees have seen that a lot. So their expectations on their superiors making tough decisions is really low. So how you deal with a tough decision is going to make or break your team's confidence in your leadership. So that this is a really, really important thing to deal with. And when you make these decisions, it's going to free up your mind for other things. You can be more productive, and ultimately that's going to make your team more productive as well. So avoiding tough decisions, we need to work on that, fix that behavior, and move on. Number 2 behavioral blind spot that I see with clients is that they become overly critical. Being overly critical of yourself dramatically affects your self-confidence and causes you to think poorly of yourself, and it clouds and colors the world around you in a bad way. When you're overly critical, it manipulates your thoughts, and your thoughts become more cynical and sarcastic, and in the long run, that prevents you from enjoying the things that should be making you happy. You begin to not be able to enjoy life and work in the way that you really should, because you've got this very critical voice in your head, criticizing everything and being overly critical about every situation that comes down the pike. Here are some signs that I look for in an executive or a leader who may be becoming more overly critical than they should be. They second guess themselves. They second guess other people. They pick themselves apart. They pick other people apart on every little thing. They don't enjoy much of anything. They're never quite satisfied with anything. Nothing's quite good enough for them. They have a very difficult time taking compliments. They're irritated a lot with just about anything you can imagine, and they complain a lot. And so they're kind of like the kid on the Charlie Brown the Peanuts cartoon. The Charlie Brown cartoon has the dark dust cloud following them around all the time, except the dust cloud's in their head, right? It's dirtying up and clouding up their thinking, and everything is just not good. Now, some ways that you can work on this and coach this and try to fix this is lighten up. Just lighten up. Give yourself a break. Give other people a little break. And once you start to lighten up a little bit, you reinforce those positive behaviors. If you focus on the good behavior you want to reinforce, not the bad behavior you want to eliminate, that breaks the cycle, right? So you can't stop being critical. At the same time, you have to start doing something else. And it's better to start doing the good than focusing on stopping the bad. So notice the good in your family, notice the good in the people around you, notice the good things that happen, make a list of some good things that happen. And this is a tough one to break with people too. I mean, I have to really bear down as a coach to really, I may have to sit down with the client and say, all right, we're going to list 3 to 5 really good things that happened to you today. Or what are three or four things that are really good about being alive and going to work today? What is 1 or 2 things that you could really look forward to today? And so you really have to keep injecting those positive, good, gratitude-oriented thoughts into their head, because the longer they've been doing it, the longer they've been overly critical, the more difficult it is to break that habit. And I don't know if you've ever seen the show Seinfeld, where George did the opposite. So every time he went to go to do a situation, he did the opposite of what he would normally do, and he got great results. That is what your guidelines should be when you're overly critical. When you start to be critical, do the opposite, right? Be complimentary or be appreciative, and do an act of kindness. So choose a positive interaction instead of a negative one. Number 3 blind spot in executives that I see or coach: does not hold people accountable. So accountability is huge. It is, I have come to believe it is one of the most critical ingredients for success in an organization. If there is no expectation of accountability and that isn't clear and communicated and followed through on, that organization is nowhere near producing the kind of results that it could. So when you're having trouble holding people accountable, here's some things, if I were your coach, that I would talk to you about doing. I would talk to you about setting up follow-up times and appointments. So if you have people that you want to enforce accountability with, set up your times that you're going to follow up with each other for status updates and those appointments. Make sure you show up and follow up and you're engaged. Don't cancel them. Don't get too busy. Don't push them off for something else you think is more important. Just follow up on the check-in when you agree to with your person. Then you need to be consistent. If you're going to follow up weekly, follow up weekly. If you're going to follow up every 2 weeks, follow up every 2 weeks. If it's a monthly check-in, do it monthly. Whatever you agree to, be consistent. Don't short circuit it and change it at the last minute. You have to get the rhythm and flow down. And once you set the timing and the frequency of the follow-up, make sure you do that. Don't follow up one time and then they don't hear from you for 3 months and then so on and so forth. Set the timing, the frequency, and do it. Ask about actions and results. So I know the big thing in business today is results. Like, listen to this example. If a salesperson makes lots of sales calls and works hard, that's a behavioral action, and it needs to be recognized. If they're not selling, then they failed on results. Some leaders have a hard time distinguishing between actions and results and the accountabilities of each. You need to hold people accountable for both, because there is a sequence of events that need to be acted upon that are best practices to get the result. So you need to make sure you're holding people accountable for those sequences and events, and those actions, and also the results that they produce. Another little piece of advice I'd give you is don't move your standards around. You're going to get what you expect to get. And if your expectations are low, you're going to get low. If your expectations are high, you're going to get high. So be sure to let them know what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, and act accordingly. If you have to apologize, I suppose that's okay. I often wonder why the leader is apologizing for the lack of results. But if you have to say something like, I'm sorry, but this is not acceptable, then that's what you have to say, right? So act accordingly. Don't move your standards around. Make sure they're very clear and have been communicated and understood and authenticated that that is what your expectations are. And then have some kind of formal system for coaching results. Be sure to be on the same page with your HR department, but make sure the steps to reward and the steps to punishment are recognized and communicated. So they know which way they're headed. They know when they're headed in the direction of success, and they know when they're headed in the direction of failure. When you have to let somebody go, it should not be a surprise. They should know what direction they're heading at all times and in every interaction with you on accountability. Number 4, this is a hard one, but some executives, and this a lot of times is in their blind spot, believe it or not, but they have anger issues. Anger issues. How do you deal with anger? Well, this is in the wheelhouse of EQ, emotional intelligence. And so if you get better from an EQ standpoint, that will enable you to start taking a few moments to collect your thoughts. You'll learn to self-regulate before you say anything, and it will allow the situation to then regulate with you. So the situation is going to respond or react to the way that you're doing it, right? You're going to be in the impact zone of that situation. So if you're out of control, the situation is going to be out of control. If you're in control, the situation is going to be in control. So if you self-regulate yourself to take a few moments to collect your thoughts and you don't fly off the handle, the situation will regulate itself to that. And once you've stabilized both yourself and the situation and your thinking is clear, then you can express your frustration in an assertive but non-confrontational way. You can tell them your concerns. You can tell them what your needs are very clearly and directly without hurting their feelings and without it sounding like you're trying to control them. You see, anger is something that we use to try to gain control. When we feel like things are out of control, we get angry, and anger is the tactic that we use to try to regain control of the situation. So if you will self-regulate yourself to be in control, anger won't be needed, right? If you regulate yourself to be in control, anger won't be needed. And if you're telling yourself, I don't know, I just have to be angry, then you're lying to yourself. You don't have to do anything. You choose to be angry, and you also choose not to be. So let's keep it in perspective. I often recognize if you're having anger issues, you may not be exercising enough, because physical activity can help reduce that stress you're feeling. It can help bring that anger down. That stress can be causing that anger, that frustration that you're not in control like you'd like to be. And if you feel your anger going up and escalating, maybe you need to go for an exercise, or maybe you need to walk around the building, or maybe you need to spend some time doing something else that you enjoy that's physical, right? And if you give yourself a few short breaks during the times of the day that tend to bother you or aggravate you or make you stressful, then a few minutes of quiet time might help you. It might get you better prepared to handle what's coming up. Never go into a meeting that's neutral when you're angry. You're the catalyst. If you take your anger into that meeting, what do you think is going to happen to the meeting? The meeting is going to go toward the distasteful, anger, bad meeting side. If you go into the meeting neutral, the meeting will stay neutral. If you go into the meeting happy, the meeting will tend to go toward a better place, right? So if you walk into every meeting thinking the meeting's neutral, then check yourself about, what are you going to be as the catalyst for that meeting? And number 5, this is one I've saved the best for last here, but number 5 blind spot for a lot of leaders is they want to be everybody's buddy and friend. And as human beings, we have social needs. We need close, supportive connections with other people. Unfortunately, that is not what drives the boss-subordinate relationship. The boss-subordinate relationship exists to accomplish work. If something prevents a direct report from doing their job, then that relationship goes into a rocky status. And if the direct report continues not to perform, chances are the relationship will come to an end. And most people, when they think about relationships ending, become very sad because relationship is equal to friendship. But it can't be that in the boss-subordinate relationship, right? Bosses and direct reports are not equal inside the organization, and friendships cannot survive status inequality. So very few people are friends with other people that don't share their same status. Birds of a feather flock together, And inside an organization, those statuses are wide and varied. And many times a friendship can really suffer from that status inequality. Friends don't actively evaluate and try to change each other. You don't get together for a poker game, have a few cigars, and critique each other. That doesn't happen most times unless you're going to different parties than I go to. They don't make their friendship contingent on change and improvement. You don't sit down with your friend and say, listen, you're going to have to improve in some ways or we're going to have to part ways. You don't do that, right? But if you're going to be an effective leader, that's what you do constantly. You're constantly assessing people's performance. You're constantly assessing their abilities, and you're pressing them in a good way to grow and change. And that creates pain. That's why we call it growing pain, right? And most people, friendship cannot endure pain between each other. Here's another thing. Friends are not always checking up on each other. You don't have to tell your friend where you are and what you're doing. But your boss, that's a different story. Managers press their people to give progress reports. They press them to evaluate themselves. They press them for commitments to future results. Friends have expectations of each other, but they're usually the same and mutual, and they're not very demanding most of the time, right? What should the boss and subordinate relationship be then? Well, very few people take the time to define it, but I'm going to try to define it for you today on today's show. The boss-subordinate relationship should never lose sight of one simple fact. It exists to accomplish work and generate results. It is a means to an end. You and your people need to connect as human beings, but always, in the end, the focus has to be on the work. And of course you need to be friendly. Nobody wants to work for a cold, distant, uncaring jerk. But ultimately, not friends in the true sense of the word friends. It has to be supervisor and supervised. That is the relationship that is focused on the work and the results that the work produces. That is what the relationship basis needs to be about. So quickly recapping these blind spots, and maybe you heard some for yourself today, but here are 5 behavioral blind spots I see in people, leaders, executives as an executive coach. I deal with these issues every single week, I promise you. Number 1, avoiding tough decisions. Number 2, being overly critical. Number 3, doesn't hold people accountable. Number 4, anger issues. And number 5, wants to be everybody's friend. I hope some of that can help you. I'm your host, Tony Richards, reminding you that everything gets better when you get better.
Thank you for listening to Better Than Before with Tony Richards, a business leaders podcast powered by Clear Vision Development Group. For more resources from Tony, visit clearvisiondevelopment.com. Join us next time for another episode of Better Than Before with Tony Richards.